Welcome back, folks. Today's episode is a solo episode, and I'm going to dive into creatine. It is maybe not the most exciting compound. It is definitely not the most novel, but I think it's really interesting, and it has benefits far beyond what most people think of when they think of creatine. When I say creatine, what do you think of? You probably think of using it for your exercise to support your fitness routine. And obviously, creatine is very well researched around for athletes, and it definitely brings some good benefits to the table when it comes to athletic performance. But it also has other benefits that I'm going to talk about today as well. So first things first, what is it? It's a natural compound. We make it in our liver. We make a little bit in our kidneys and in our pancreas, but for the most part, we make it in our liver. We can get it from food, primarily from red meat and from fish. And because our bodies make it naturally, this is one of those compounds that when you supplement with it from the outside, your body will reduce the amount that it makes. But the good news is that as soon as you stop taking it, your body goes right back up and produces its own. It just won't produce as much to give you that super physiological dose that you can get from supplementation. So how much, when, and how do you supplement? So a lot of people like to do a loading dose or loading period of creatine. I personally don't, but for people who prefer to do it that way, what they might do is do 20 grams a day for 1 to 2 weeks and then drop back to a maintenance dose of anywhere from 2 to 5 grams a day. The problem with the 20 grams a day is that creatine can cause gastric distress, mainly very, 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 very loose stools, which means you better be close to a bathroom. One of the ways you can mitigate that is you divide your dose over the course of the day. So you might take 5 grams with each meal of the day or with some food. So if you only eat 2 meals, that's only 5 grams. That's 2. That's only 10 grams. If you really want to take 20, you're going to have to eat something 2 other times of the day so that you would take your creatine with food. There's some evidence that caffeine may interfere with creatine. I don't think it's a huge deal, but if you're worried about it at all, then I would take your creatine away from caffeine. I personally put my creatine in my coffee in the morning, but I drink decaf, so I get a buy. Creatine pairs particularly well with a little bit of carbohydrate. The carbohydrate helps the creatine to get into the cell, and we want that to happen. So if you're taking just pure creatine monohydrate, you may need to have a little bit of carb with it. You could do a little bit of D-ribose, for example. Well, I don't know if D-ribose counts as a carb actually, as I talk out loud. But definitely having with, if you're eating part of a banana, or if you're eating a piece of apple, or if you're, any kind of carb at all, pairing that with your creatine, maybe even milk, there's carbs in milk, you might be able to facilitate the entry of the creatine into the cell with that. There are supplements that take this into account. There's the one that I use in particular that I'll tell you what it is at the end of the podcast. They have taken this into account because that's just how they build their supplements. They take everything into account. But I just wanted to, but let's leave that for later, and let's talk a little bit more about what it is, what creatine can do and how it helps in different areas. And so there's 5 main areas where there's 4 main areas where creatine really helps. 1 is with muscle, 2 is with bone, 3 is with brain, and number 4, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, I didn't realize this until I started to dig in, is it may actually help to protect DNA from damage, particularly in mitochondria. So this is mitochondrial DNA in particular. So this is a good opportunity, now that we've brought up mitochondria in the first place, to talk about how does creatine work and what is it actually doing. So creatine works in the mitochondria. It helps the body, basically the mitochondria, use the fats, carbs, proteins that you eat and convert them into something called ATP. Many of you who are regular listeners of this podcast know that ATP is the energy currency of your body. The more ATP you have, the more energy you have, and the more energy you have, the better your life's going to be in so many different ways. And so given the fact that what creatine actually does is help to create energy in the mitochondria, it's no big surprise that it has such wide-ranging benefits, right? That it's no big surprise that it has huge benefits for the muscle, because a lot of the supplemental creatine we take gets stored in skeletal muscle. But researchers have also observed that when people supplement with creatine, their brain creatine levels increase as well. So a couple of details on the muscle side is that one of the pathways that seems to be impacted is that creatine upregulates the expression of certain types of genes. And one of the gene sections, or one of the gene groups that it does impact positively, is that activates satellite cells. Satellite cells are cells that help us to build more muscle fibers. Turns out that our satellite cells start to get a little lazy and kind of retire themselves as we age, which is one of the many reasons why we have such a harder time making muscles as we get older. And so taking creatine seems to offset that tendency a little bit, and seems to help older people in particular build more muscle, in spite of the fact that your body's trying to build less muscle. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have benefits for younger athletes. It actually has a lot, and it is one of those compounds that athletes use a lot of. The only thing is, like, for people in the bodybuilding community, they're pretty cautious around when they use creatine, because one of the side effects, if you will, of creatine is that it causes you to hold water. It's not a ton, but it's a couple of pounds. And for these figure competitors and bodybuilders, where they need to be almost dried out so that every little striation of the muscle is visible to the judges, the last thing they're going to want to do is do anything that drives up water retention. So for those of you who decide you're going to want to preload with creatine, so do a loading phase of 1 to 2 weeks of up to 20 grams of creatine a day, which, by the way, you would not continue that. That's just your loading phase. Be mindful that you may actually put on a couple of pounds, but it'll be water weight. But that's how it does it. Now, another interesting little tidbit on creatine is that in endurance athletes, it seems to improve heat tolerance. Interesting, right? So they were looking at endurance runners running in these races where it's super hot, and they seem to take longer to get exhausted by the heat, to suffer from heat exhaustion. And there was a hypothesis that maybe this has to do with the increased water in the cells. There wasn't a clear mechanism of action, but definitely if you're someone that works out in heat, then taking creatine on a daily basis, you may notice that you tolerate the heat a little bit better when you're exercising. Also, in those endurance athletes, it seemed to reduce the catabolic effect of that long duration, steady state exercise. So they didn't seem to lose as much muscle mass from those long endurance races. Interesting. I don't think of endurance running particularly as a longevity workout. It tends to be way too much wear and tear on your joints and on your body in general. It's just a lot of pounding. I think that for high intensity exercise and short duration, that tends to be a much better exercise for us for longevity, which doesn't mean you don't want to do longer duration workout once in a while or once a week. But generally speaking, we want to do resistance exercise. We want to lift heavy weights, and we want to do that high intensity kind of short duration exercise where we're really pushing our VO2 max, because VO2 max, of course, is one of the really clear hallmarks of longevity. So for that, our creatine is going to be very helpful. It's particularly helpful for bursts of performance, for high intensity and short duration exercise. It has clear benefits there in terms of improving outcomes. Also, for weightlifting, it will improve strength. One of the reasons for that is it seems to have a benefit for recovery of muscle post-exercise. So we know that when we work out really hard, we sustain little tiny micro tears in the muscle. Our body's ability to repair those muscles is part of the process by which we build new muscle fibers and grow our muscles. And it seems that creatine, probably by bringing energy to the party once again, helps with repairing those micro tears. So creatine, big win when it comes to muscle. Also, bone. This was a new one for me. It seems to have benefits for building bone. And for those of us who are postmenopausal or premenopausal, or frankly, any menopausal or not menopausal, whether you're a man or a woman, you want to do whatever you can to preserve your bones. And creatine plays a distinct role in bone remodeling by impacting osteoblasts and even improving sensitivity to estrogen. So there's an interaction with vitamin D3. Calcium comes to the party. I would also include vitamin K2. But it seems to be that by bringing energy into the system, it gives energy to the osteoblasts and they're better able to remodel bone. And that can show up as better results in terms of maintaining bone integrity and bone density. So it's less of a bone mineral density benefit from the studies I read, but definitely in terms of the pliability and the structure and the integrity of the bone, it was a win. And so anything we can do to make our bones better is going to be a huge positive for us as we get older. So big tick next to bone with creatine. Here's a big one, brain. Now, it even showed benefits for young people on brain, on cognitive performance, but on older people, big benefits on cognitive performance. So anybody over the age of 50, take your creatine, because creatine, phosphocreatine, which is what creatine gets turned into so that it can do its work in the mitochondria, is shown those levels will go up in brain cells when we supplement with creatine. So it definitely gets into the brain and it upregulates energy in brain cells, and therefore it is neuroprotective. So there's reams of studies going on around this right now because it seriously has cognitive benefits. It has positive effects on learning and memory. It helps with TBIs. So it helps with the resolution of TBIs, but it even helps if you happen to be taking creatine regularly and you get knocked on the head, you may sustain less damage than a person who's deficient in creatine. So that's another big reason why just supplementing with creatine on a daily basis would be beneficial. Your bones are going to be healthier, your muscles are going to be bigger and healthier, and your brain is going to be more resilient. It's under being researched for a huge number of neurodegenerative diseases, and there's direct evidence that's showing that it definitely seems to have benefits for things like Parkinson's disease, for dementia, for Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's. That's it for the neurodegenerative. And like I said, the TBIs. So from a brain perspective, lots of evidence that shows that it's beneficial, even for younger people, but definitely for older people. One other thing I wanted to say about the brain is for people who suffer from depression. Now, for people who suffer from depression, there seems to be a dopaminergic, serotonergic effect or impact of the creatine on the brain, where they did a study with a bunch of women who suffered from depression and who were on SSRIs. They also gave them creatine at the same time, and they all seemed to feel better. They all had a positive result. So if you're on an SSRI and you've been diagnosed with depression, I would strongly recommend that you go to your physician or your medical provider and have a conversation with them to see if creatine would be good for you, because it's easy. It's not particularly expensive, and there doesn't appear to be much of a downside. Actually, it doesn't seem to be any downside, but I don't want to overstate it just in case there's something that's going to come up at some point in the future. In any event, definitely for the brain and for many, many brain conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, creatine seems to bring something to the table. So for our aging parents or relatives or anybody who's already got one of these conditions, adding a little bit of creatine into the world, I would start low, like at 2 grams, and to see if that helps them at all would probably be a great idea. But obviously, if they've got other issues, other health issues, you're always going to want to speak with their medical doctor. Now let's talk about diabetes. We know the metabolic syndrome is a massive problem in our society. And guess what? Creatine seems to have some benefits for people who are diabetic. How does that work? Well, one of the methods that creatine works by is by upregulating the expression of GLUT4 receptors. GLUT4, GLUT4 receptors. And what are these? These are the catcher's mitts that grab glucose out of the bloodstream and store it into the cell. It's one of the reasons why creatine is very, very present in skeletal muscle. That's where we're going to store glycogen, which is it's the storage form of glucose, right? So for diabetics, it may actually be quite helpful for glucose disposal. And it's going to help the rest of us too. People who are pre-diabetic or people who are, haven't quite gotten that diagnosis yet, but their blood sugar seems to be a little too high all the time, might be very helpful for them. A little tidbit. This was just like one article. I didn't see a ton about this, but it seems to have benefits for people who have an insufficient blood flow to their heart. So if you know someone who's been diagnosed with a condition where they're not getting enough blood flow to the heart, creatine seems to be helpful in mitigating some of those negative effects. It's not obviously going to fix the problem, but anything we can do to bring energy and blood to that heart muscle. And of course, at the end of the day, it's just a great big muscle, right? Well, I mean, it's more than a muscle. Some people say it's a vortex. Other people say it's a pump. Regardless of what it is, it's critical to our existence. So anything we can do to feed that muscle what it needs is going to benefit us. And so for people with insufficiency of blood flow to the cardiac muscle, creatine could have some real benefits. Finally, and then I'm going to talk about some of the downsides or some of the concerns that people have around creatine. The last thing I'm going to talk about is, interestingly enough, creatine seems to have a protective effect on DNA, specifically in the mitochondria. So that the mitochondria is its playground, right? That's where creatine does its thing. Well, one of the things that it seems to do is to protect DNA in the mitochondria. And we know that one of the hallmarks of aging is DNA damage. So anything we can do that's going to protect that DNA, particularly in the mitochondria. I mean, all of our DNA is important to us, but definitely getting things into the mitochondria is never all that easy. Creatine seems to play a really good role in protecting mitochondrial DNA. Big tick. So that's the big one. There were some articles. I'm just going to throw a few things out here. I mean, I'm not going, I'd have to go for like a full hour to really do a deep dive here, but there seems to be some evidence that it may be helpful in supporting DNA methylation by preserving methyl groups because it brings some to the table. There were benefits observed in some research with people with fibromyalgia. Just little tidbits here. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about the brain is, and this is a really good one, this is a really great tip. If you ever find yourself to be sleep deprived, take some creatine. So creatine seems to be really, really helpful in cases of sleep deprivation. And I just last weekend was at a conference and I had an exceptionally poor night's sleep. I don't generally have poor night's sleep. I'm actually a really good sleeper, but the night before I was presenting, I woke up at 3 a.m. And of course, when you've got a lot on your mind and you wake up at 3 a.m., there's probably nothing worse because you're just basically not going back to sleep, right? So that morning when I finally decided it was time to get out of bed, I did my hour-long NuCalm, which I know helps me to kind of rest my brain in a different way and get it ready for the day. And I took creatine. I take creatine every day anyway, but I took creatine first thing in the morning. And then I ended up taking a little bit more a little later before I went out on stage because it is really good for overcoming sleep deprivation. This is not an invitation to deprive yourself from sleep and just take more creatine. It's only going to help so much, but definitely on occasion when if you're flying or across time zones or you have a bad night of sleep and you want to be kind of in good shape the next day, taking creatine or taking a little extra creatine is probably a really good idea and might be very, very helpful. So how do you take creatine? Like I said before, I don't know if I said it before, but basically you're going to take it either before or after your workouts on the days that you work out. I kept seeing a paper that says take it before, then I'd see another one that says take it after. There seems to be a tiny preference for post-workout, but really whenever you can take it, take it. It doesn't seem to make a massive difference one way or the other. You can definitely have it with a little bit of food if you want. Like I said, I put it in my coffee, but take it in with a decaf coffee because there seems to be some evidence that caffeine might interfere with how it works. You want it with a little bit of carb. You would start, if you've never used creatine before, And if you're a sedentary person, you're going to want to start with 2 grams a day. That's going to be your starting dose. If you're very active or an athlete, 5 grams a day is going to be your maintenance dose. For the sedentary person, the 2 grams a day is the maintenance dose. 2 grams a day for an athlete or a very active person is going to do nothing. They're going to chew through that in like no time at all, and then they're still going to be deficient. If you choose to do a loading dose, then you might do 20 grams for 7 to 14 days before you go to that maintenance dose I just mentioned. That could be up to 20 grams a day. But please make sure that you divide the dose, because if you take 20 grams all at once, you're going to find yourself running for the bathroom. So take 5 grams 3 or 4 times a day. Maybe start with 5 grams once. Next day, take 5 grams twice a day, then build it up to 3 and then to 4. Go gradually, feel your way. And if you find that your trips to the bathroom are becoming much more frequent and your insides seem to have liquefied, then you're going to have to back down that dose a little bit, or make sure that you take it with food, because that may help to buffer those effects a little bit. What else? So now, who shouldn't use creatine, or what are some of the concerns around creatine supplementation? There are a few main ones. There's people are concerned about kidneys. People are concerned about hair loss. And there are also people who are concerned around cancer. Now, this is not medical advice. I'm going to say this again. Please, if you have any chronic condition, any disease of any kind, you've been diagnosed with any medical condition, please make sure that you check with your medical team before you add even creatine that seems to be so safe to the mix. When it comes to cancer, the first thing I will tell you is there's no evidence that I've seen that creatine causes cancer. If anything, it seems to have some benefits for people who are undergoing cancer treatment, because it may be helpful for them to not lose as much muscle mass. So speak to your provider, make sure it's okay for you. There may be variations depending on what type of cancer. There's so much variation in these things. We're learning so much every single day. Just because I didn't see the evidence doesn't mean it's not there. Speak to your specialist and make sure that they'll clear you for it. But definitely there are benefits to creatine in certain cases when people have cancer. When it comes to kidney disease, again, chronic kidney disease, this is a big one. People really seem to think that creatine is very hard on the kidneys. It actually isn't. There's no conclusive evidence that says it's damaging to the kidneys. Now, there may be a specialist out there who's listening to this, slapping themselves on the head, rolling their eyes, going, "Are you kidding me? It's the worst." If that is true, then I invite you to put it down in the comments. I didn't find any studies to that effect. If anything, there may have been some benefit systemically, but speak to your provider. I think that one of the reasons why people think that creatine is so bad for kidneys is there's something in blood serum that you will measure in your blood work called creatinine, which is a downstream metabolite of creatine made in the kidneys. It doesn't mean that, and it is a sign of kidney damage, but it doesn't mean that the creatine is actually damaging the kidney. So it's a bit of a finer point. And I think that because of all the benefits for the brain and for muscles and well-being and being able to perform your daily tasks, I think it's worth it to speak to your doc and see what they think about creatine and if it might be okay for you. Maybe in your case, you will only take 2 grams a day and not go to a bigger dose. All right. What was the last one? I said chronic kidney disease, excuse me, cancer. Oh, hair loss. This is a big one. I've had a couple of people come to me and say, "Oh, no. If somebody is working really hard not to lose their hair, so they are prone to hair loss. So this is not going to cause you to lose your hair." Number one, if you're a regular person walking around and you have no hair loss issues, taking creatine is not going to cause your hair to jump off your head. However, for people who have androgenic hair loss, whether you're a man or a woman, and that may mean that the hair follicles in your head are particularly sensitive to something called DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone, which is a downstream metabolite of testosterone. Yeah, again, it's not definitive. Everything that I read was very mixed on this. It didn't seem that there was clear evidence, but there is a question. Is there a possibility that because creatine could upregulate testosterone and DHT, and particularly DHT actually, is it possible that using creatine could drive hair loss even more in these people that are already losing their hair because of excess DHT? If you're one of these people, then possibly go with caution. But like I said, the studies I looked at didn't support it, right? But definitely what you'll see is if you lift weights and you use creatine, there is going to be an increase in that DHT production. So be mindful. You would see the hair loss 2 months in while you're supplementing. So the bad news is, and for people who have androgenic hair loss, just because you stop doesn't mean the hair that you lost is coming back. And so it may be that there's better compounds out there for you instead of using creatine if you're really concerned about this. But generally speaking, not going to make you lose your hair. It's not going to kill your kidneys, and it's not going to give you cancer. Okay? One little tiny tidbit of interest, creatine seems to be really good for skin. So I read an article that talked about it using creatine topically. I haven't found skincare with creatine topically, or maybe I'm using something upstairs that has creatine in it. I haven't noticed it, but definitely there seems to be some evidence there. So maybe someday we need to come up with a creatine serum to add to our many, many serums on our bathroom counter. I know that my bathroom counter is pretty full of stuff. So another neat thing about creatine, it's not wildly expensive. It's very easy to take. It dissolves easily in water. You can put it in your shake or your smoothie. You can mix it with yogurt. You can throw it in any drink. I sometimes mix it with my essential amino acids. Like I take my scoop of my Creatine amino acids, throw them in a bottle, put in a scoop of my creatine, which I'll tell you which one I use in a minute. And then today, actually in this bottle, I've got my Creatine aminos. I've got Armra blood orange colostrum, and I've got my creatine. And it just tastes like the only thing is that it doesn't always melt in the water. So you want to stir up that drink a little bit so that it goes into suspension, and then it's super easy to drink. All right. So the big unveil, what's the creatine that I use? I will tell you that most creatines on the market are pretty good, but I don't love walking into GNC and just taking anything off the shelf. I don't fully trust their sourcing. So if you want to go with more of a commercial kind of run of the mill, I always love the professional brands like Thorne, Designs for Health. Who else has a decent creatine? I think it's Douglas Labs. They have their sports brand. They also make creatine. The one that I'm loving right now that I think takes it up a notch is by Level Up Health. And it's called CRE-volution, so Crevolution. And the reason why this is innovative in terms of formulations, because Kyle does his homework. And in this formula, you're going to have a little bit of carb to help get that creatine into the cells. Plus, he's also included something called GAA, which stands for guanidoacetic acid. And what that is a precursor to creatine. So he's giving your body the materials to make more creatine for itself. Plus, he's got some TMG in there, which is trimethylglycine, so more methyl groups. And he's got also magnesium chloride. He's got a great stack of stuff that works very synergistically together. So I've been using it lately and really, really loving it. And something that I just said just reminded me of something else that I read while I was doing my research. And it seems to have slipped my mind. Clearly, I need more creatine right now. Okay, well, if it comes back to me, I'll add it to the caption on the post when we talk about this episode. But basically, that's the scoop on creatine. Like I said, it's not a super deep dive. There's so much more to learn about this stuff, but it is a fantastic compound. I think it belongs in our longevity stacks for sure. And particularly as we get older, we want to hang on to our lean mass and build healthy, functional lean mass. And this is going to be a critical component along with other things. Like I just mentioned, the Creatine aminos, huge piece of the puzzle. So all of the links to all of the products I talk about, are on natnitum.com under Nat Recommends. you will find those links, and you will find even links to episodes and discount codes and all the things. And we, of course, often talk about it on the newsletter, stuff like that. So thank you so much for being here. I've kept it to 30 minutes on the nose, just about. I appreciate you guys being here. Let me know how you like this episode. And if there's another compound that you're interested in me diving into in the future, because I'll be doing these on a regular basis. And I think that it just kind of came to me on my walk with my dog this morning that exploring various longevity compounds in these solo episodes is a really great way to look at it. It's a great way to spend a half an hour, super short. Okay. Thanks so much. Have an amazing day. I appreciate you guys being here. Make sure that you give us a tick on social media. It's Natalie Nidham on Instagram, and we'll see you next time.